So on August 9th, Mr. and Mrs. Labianca drove up to Lake Isabella to not only pick up the boat that they left there for Frank and Susan, who were Rosemary's children from a previous relationship. So they drove up to Lake Isabella to retrieve the boat and bring back Frank. Now, Frank, who was having so much fun, begged to stay, and they let him stay. So Mr. and Mrs. Labianca and Susan drove home with boat in tow without Frank. Now, on August 10th, just after 1 a.m., the Labiancas dropped off Susan at her apartment on Greenwood Place. So here we are at the El Pueblo Apartments at 4616 Greenwood Place in LA. This is where Susan Struthers lived and was dropped off by the Labiancas that night in 1969. This apartment building is also used as the exterior for the apartments in Melrose Place. In case it looks familiar to anyone, that's where it's from. And from there they stopped at a newsstand located on Hearst in Franklin. The owner of the newsstand was a John Fokianos, and he recognized Leno's Thunderbird with boat in tow as it U-turned around and pulled up in front of his newsstand. Here we are at the corner of Hearst and Franklin, where the Labiancas stopped to pick up that newspaper from Mr. Fokianos. And I spoke to him about the murders on the previous night on Cielo Drive. And this here was the last point of contact, outside of the killers, of course, that the Labiancas had with anyone else. Mr. Fokianos, he said that, during the investigation, he said that the couple looked tired, but they did have small talk about what was front page news, and that was the Tate murders. And that Mrs. LaBianca looked kind of worried about it, frightened, That's a huge murder. It's a huge, gruesome murder that happened in town. So I could imagine at 1 a.m. hearing this type of news and going home is, wasn't a good feeling. So Mr. Fokianos was probably the last person to see them alive outside of their killers. Now we're into August 10th, 1969. Frank is dropped off by whoever he was with coming back from Lake Isabella at about 8:30 p.m. The first thing that Frank notices is Leno's Thunderbird and boat still parked out on the street, which is way out of character because he knows Leno would have parked it by now, So he takes his luggage up the long driveway. If you haven't been there or haven't seen the pictures, it's a long driveway up to the main house. Frank stows his luggage and stuff in the garage, and he goes around to the back door of the home, and he notices right away something was out of place because the shades were down, and they really were never down. The kitchen light was on. Frank knocked a few times. He called out a few times, no answer. So he took a walk, which it wasn't, I've been there, it wasn't a short walk to me. I mean, it was down a pretty long street, but there was a burger stand in the area on the corner of Hyperion and Rowena. Now Frank used the payphone there to try to reach his sister Susan. He called the restaurant she was working at, and the manager got on the phone and said she was off that day, but if you give me the number to your payphone, let me call your sister and have her call you. And that's what happened. Susan called the payphone, in which Frank relayed the news to her about what he saw at the house. Susan said, just wait there. So here we are at the LaBianca residence at what was 3301 Waverly Drive. And you really can't get a great shot of the house now with the trees and the gate and everything, but you can see the long driveway. This part over here to the right, this additional driveway with the parking area, that's been added on. I was able to include the actual sound of the neighborhood during this time in the morning. I know it's been over 50 years, but where this house sits, it's extremely quiet, even at 8:30 in the morning or whatever time it was. Okay, based on the research that I did, I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but it makes the most sense that Frank, when he did take the walk, it was the street called St. George. That's right down his driveway and to the left. It's a long street, but I estimate that this is the street he walked down to get to the corner of Rowena and Hyperion to what was then a Charburger. Here we are in front of it. It's a Mixto restaurant now. I believe the payphone sat right about here, and this is the area where he did use the phone. Another little tidbit here is the telephone pole directly in front of Mixto has 2 marker nails on it. The one on the left represents the height of the pole, which is 55 feet, which puts it about 7.5 feet in the ground. The marker nail to the right, 61, is the year the pole was put in. So this pole right here was here then. So at 9:30 p.m. approximately, Susan and her boyfriend Joe Dorgan picked up Frank at that payphone, and they drove to the house on Waverly. Now, in Helter Skelter, it said they opened the door with a set of keys that Rosemary left in her car, but it's also noted in the book that since no one tried opening the door before the keys were retrieved, we don't know whether it was locked previously. Dorgan told Susan to stay in the kitchen while he and Frank checked the house out, and they find Leno first. He was sprawled out on his back, a throw pillow over his head, and there was a cord around his neck and something protruding from his stomach. So Joe picked up the kitchen phone and then put it down because he feared that he would ruin evidence. He told Susan everything is okay and let's get out of here as they rushed out of the house. Across the street there was a duplex, and it appears to be still a duplex. I know the structure's still there at 3308 Waverly. They went knocking on the door across the street there, and naturally the people that were living there were like, we'll call for you, but we're not going to let you in. So during that commotion, as the residents at 3308 were telling Joe, hey, we'll call for you, but we're not going to let you in, Joe went right next door to 3306, and the Brigham couple let him use the phone, and he was able to call the police at that point. Approximately 10:40 to 10:42, 2 officers arrived, a W.C. Rodriguez and a J.C. Tony, and they entered the premises with Joe. Susan and Frank stayed across the street. Once Rodriguez saw the scene, he immediately called backup, called a supervisor, called for an ambulance. And what he found was, in addition to the pillow that Joe and Frank had seen, there was a bloody pillowcase over Mr. Labianca's head. The cord around his neck was attached to a nearby lamp. His hands were tied with a leather thong behind his back. And there was an ivory-handled carving fork that was plunged into his stomach. Someone carved war into his belly. In the other room, Rosemary was lying face down on the bedroom floor, parallel to the bed and dresser, in a large pool of blood. She had on a short pink nightgown with an expensive dress over that. Both garments were bunched over her head and exposed pretty much her complete backside, and an extreme amount of stab wounds. Her hands weren't tied, but a pillowcase was over her head and a lamp cord was around her neck. And based on the tautness of the cord, officers deducted that she still tried to crawl as it was wrapped around her neck because the cord itself was tight. And 2 feet away from that was a second pool of blood. Going through the house, everyone's seen what was written on the walls and on the refrigerator, but a more precise look at that was that on the north wall in the living room, "Death to Pigs" was written in blood. On the south wall left of the front door read "RUIZ." And on the refrigerator door, "Helter Skelter" was written. Now, it wasn't spelled Helter, it was Healter.